Madam President, I rise today to discuss the Iran nuclear deal. We are here today because several months ago, Senators Corker and Cardin, the respective chair and ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, worked out an agreement to allow us to have this debate. It was voted on here in the Senate. There were 98 votes in support of allowing a vote on the Iranian nuclear agreement. In fact, it went to the President's desk. The President then signed it into law, and that set in place a process which is where we end up today. And I certainly hope that our colleagues who voted for this allow us to have that debate. It's an important debate. It has serious consequences for America's national security interest, and it certainly is something that shouldn't be minimized in any way, and the American people need to have their voices heard in this discussion, which will take place if we're allowed to get on that resolution here in the United States Senate. So I would hope that our colleagues on the other side, there's been some discussion I've read in reporting of statements made by the President or by his members of his administration, statements made by some of our colleagues here that perhaps they might block us even proceeding to this resolution. I think that would be a big mistake. It would be a tragic outcome with respect to something that is this important to America's national security, and certainly something that the American people, I think, deserve and have a right to have their voices heard about. So I'm looking forward to this discussion, and I hope that throughout the course of the next few days we'll have the chance to air this out, because it's clear that one of the greatest threats to our national security is the possibility of a nuclear-armed Iran and a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. Unfortunately, President Obama's Iran nuclear deal, which is really a nuclear concessions deal, increases rather than decreases that possibility. Madam President, there are numerous reasons to be concerned about a nuclear-armed Iran. Iran is the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism. That's well documented. It's been talked about a lot. Iran actively supports Hezbollah and Hamas, both of which pose an immediate threat to our ally Israel. Iran incites regional instability, supporting the Houthis in Yemen and the Assad regime in Syria. Iran continues to commit human rights abuses against its own people. And Iran has a history of taking extreme measures to hide its nuclear enrichment program from the international community. In response to Iran's nuclear activities 9 years ago in 2006, the UN and the United States began to impose sanctions on Iran's nuclear enrichment program. These sanctions were dramatically increased in 2010. The sanctions targeted Iranian businesses and financial institutions, as well as members of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC, who were responsible for killing hundreds of Americans. And it froze Iranian assets that would have been used by Iran to support terrorism throughout the region. This had a tremendous impact, effectively bringing Iran to its knees. Thanks to the pressure the sanctions exerted on Iran's economy, Iran's leadership was under immense pressure to negotiate with the United States and our allies, and in 2013, Iran agreed to engage in talks regarding its nuclear program. However, soon after Iran agreed to come to the negotiating table, the Obama administration inexplicably began making concession after concession, with Iran giving up very little in return. The result? A weak deal that is highly unlikely to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear power. Madam President, we've already heard from many of my colleagues why this agreement is a bad deal. Once this deal goes into effect, right off the bat, Iran has access to roughly $140 billion, which even President Obama and Secretary Kerry acknowledged will be partly used to finance terrorism. The deal also increased Iran's access to conventional weapons, allowing Iran to defend its nuclear infrastructure from a military strike. And by lifting the ban on ballistic missiles, Iran will be able to purchase a delivery system capable of carrying a nuclear warhead well beyond the confines of the Middle East. The deal will also allow Iran to continue its research and development into advanced centrifuges, permitting Iran to modernize its enrichment infrastructure and reducing the breakout period toward a nuclear weapon to a few weeks instead of even months. The outcome of this agreement will be a more prosperous, better armed, more dangerous Iran exerting its regional influence and continuing to sponsor terror. And all of that will be achieved without Iran violating the terms of the agreement. However, if Iran does decide to cheat, this deal will make that even more possible. To begin with, for suspicious sites not currently on the list of Iran's nuclear facilities, Iran gets 24 days notice before inspections can take place. Even more concerning, however, is the information leaked recently that the secret International Atomic Energy Agency agreements with Iran will allow Iran to provide its own soil samples to inspectors from enrichment sites such as the facility at Parshin. Think about that. The regime, which has broken these agreements in the past, has cheated in the past, again, well documented, would be able to furnish its own soil inspections. Well, unfortunately, instead of acknowledging this concern when it was raised in committee hearings, Secretary Kerry took on the role of apologist for Iran, defending the deal by saying that private agreements with the IAEA are the norm. However, if the leaked information regarding soil samples is correct, this calls into question the entire credibility of the inspections regime. And for this reason, and many others, I strongly oppose President Obama's nuclear arms concession agreement with Iran. And I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to do the same. By rejecting this agreement, we can negotiate a better deal, one that will actually stop Iran's nuclear program and prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. It's unfortunate, Madam President, when you have a majority of the American people clearly opposing this deal, that the President is not only willing to veto their opposition, but to call doing so a victory.